My dad brought his mistress to my mother's funeral. He introduced her to the pastor as a colleague from his office. He introduced her to my aunts as someone who had been very supportive during a difficult time. He stood in the receiving line with her 6 feet from my mother's casket and shook hands with people who had driven 4 hours to be there, and he let them believe she was a co-worker being kind. I had known about her since my mother was in hospice. I had found the hotel receipts in the car 3 weeks before my mother died. I had said nothing because my mother was dying and I had not wanted her last 3 weeks to be about that. But my mother was buried now, and the woman who had been sleeping with my father while my mother was in a hospital bed asking me to water her houseplants was standing in our living room eating the food my mother's church friends had brought. I am a 3rd grade teacher. I want to say something about the specific way that 9 years of 3rd grade had trained me to read rooms, and about what I had seen in that living room when I had decided the moment had arrived. A 3rd grade classroom in November of a school year is a particular room. By November, you know every child's specific capacity. You know who is ready to be challenged and who needs another week of scaffolding. You know the child who shuts down if corrected publicly, and the child who needs the public acknowledgement to take the lesson seriously. You know what the room can hold. You know the moment when the room is exactly ready for the thing you have been waiting to deliver. I had been reading that living room all afternoon the way I read a classroom in November. I had been reading the energy in the room, the specific settling that happens when people have food and have found a place to stand and have offered their condolences and have begun to relax into the ordinary rhythms of human gathering even in grief. The room had settled exactly enough. She had been in the room for long enough that leaving immediately after would be conspicuous. My father had been accepting the condolences that she had not earned. The room had been full. The moment had been exactly right. I had tapped the glass. The room had turned toward me. I had said what I had said without raising my voice. 3rd grade teaches you not to raise your voice. The lower the voice, the more carefully people listen. I had been heard in every corner of that living room. I also want to say something about what the morning after the funeral had been like, and about the specific quality of the quiet that had been in my apartment when I had woken up in it. The morning after a significant thing is always strange. The body has not yet understood that the geography of the life has changed. It wakes in the familiar way. It reaches for the familiar rhythms. Then the knowledge arrives. The thing that happened yesterday is still the thing that happened yesterday. The morning after my mother's funeral had been this in its specific form. I had woken in my apartment, and the peace lily had been on the windowsill, and the morning light had been on it, and I had lain in my bed and looked at the peace lily for a long time. I had thought about what I had said in the living room the day before. I had not regretted it. I had thought about whether I should regret it, and I had found that the place in me where regret would have lived was occupied instead by a specific kind of quiet. Not peace exactly. Something more like the quiet that follows when the true thing has been said and cannot be unsaid and does not need to be. I had said the true thing at the right moment. My mother's sister had stood beside me. The room had heard. The woman had left. These were facts now. The lily had been on the windowsill. The morning light had been on it. I had looked at it for a long time, and then I had gotten up and I had given it the filtered water, and I had gone on. The lily had been on the windowsill when I woke. I had given it the filtered water. I had gone on. This is what going on looks like in its specific smallest form. You give the plant the filtered water and you go on. My mother had known this. She had given me the instructions for the specific requirements of the specific thing in front of you. The lily had been the specific thing. I had given it what it required. I had gone on. The day after the funeral had started with the lily and the filtered water, and had continued from there. I had graded the papers my students had submitted before I had taken the leave days for the funeral. The papers had been about what they had done over the weekend. I had read each one. The specific ordinary lives of 8-year-olds had been exactly what the day after the funeral had needed. The work had held me. It has continued to hold me. She had known it would. She had given me the direction. I am a 3rd grade teacher. I go back to the classroom every September. The classroom is the place where the work continues. The work my mother had been doing for 26 years. The work I have been doing for 9. It continues because there are always children who need the right book at the right moment. My mother gave me the belief that made the work possible. I carry the belief into the classroom every September. She is there every September. The work holds us both. Taught 3rd grade at an elementary school in Charlotte for 9 years, and the specific discipline of teaching 8-year-olds is patience and timing. You do not correct every mistake the moment it happens. You choose the moment carefully, You wait until the child is ready to receive the information, and then you deliver it clearly and without cruelty. I had been waiting since the moment I had seen her walk through the door of the church with my father. I had been waiting all through the graveside service. I had been waiting while people filled their plates and found seats in the living room. I had waited until the room was full, and my father was standing near the fireplace accepting condolences, and she was beside him with her hand on his arm. I tapped my glass and said, I want to say something about what the receiving line at the church had been like, and about the specific quality of the anger I had felt while standing in it. The receiving line after a funeral is one of the more specific rituals of American grief. You stand and people come to you and say things that are true even when they are not specific, and you receive them because the receiving is the point, not the words. I had been in that line for an hour and 10 minutes. My father had been beside me for part of it. She had been somewhere in the church. I had not looked for her, but I had been aware of her in the specific way you are aware of something you are choosing not to look at directly. I had shaken hands and I had hugged people, and I had said thank you for coming, and she was everything you would have expected her to be, and she had always known how loved she was, and I had meant every word of every version of those sentences. My mother had been loved. She had known it. The specific anger I had felt in that receiving line was not the anger of a daughter whose father had done a terrible thing. It was the anger of a daughter watching a terrible thing receive condolences it had not earned. The woman had accepted sympathy for a loss she had contributed to creating. This had been in the receiving line, and I had held it through the receiving line because the receiving line had not been the moment. I had known when the moment was. I had been waiting for the room to fill. I also want to say something about the 4 minutes between when I had finished speaking and when she had left the house, and about what those 4 minutes had looked like. She had not made a scene. I want to be accurate about this. She had set down her plate, she had retrieved her purse from wherever she had put it, and she had walked to the door and let herself out. She had not said anything. My father had not moved from the fireplace for the entire 4 minutes. The room had been very quiet in the specific way that rooms are quiet when something has been said into them that changes the air. Some people had looked at their plates. Some people had looked at me. My mother's oldest friend, a woman who had known my mother since they were both 23 years old, had looked at my father at the fireplace in a way that contained the entirety of what she was feeling without any of it requiring words. After the door had closed, the room had released its breath gradually, the way rooms do when the thing they have been holding has been allowed to become real. Conversations had resumed. Food had been eaten. My mother had been talked about in the specific tender terms that the people who loved her used when they talked about her. The room had returned to being what it was supposed to be, a room full of people who had loved my mother. It had taken 4 minutes. The 4 minutes had been necessary. The room had returned to what it was supposed to be. My mother had deserved that room full of people who had loved her being exactly that. She had gotten it. In the end, the room had been for her. Not for the woman who had left. Not for my father at the fireplace. For my mother. The room had been full of people who had loved her. I had made sure of it. I had tapped the glass with a dessert spoon the way you tap a glass when you want a room to turn toward you. The room had turned. I had spoken at a normal conversational volume. Every person in the room had heard every word. 3rd grade teaches you. Lower the voice, increase the attention. I had lowered my voice. Every person in the room had given me their complete attention. She had heard every word too. And then she had left. To say a few words about my mother. I want to say a few words about who she was, and about what the last months of her life had been like. My mother had been a woman who had never, in 37 years of marriage, broken a promise she made to my father. Not one. I watched the color leave my father's face from across the room. I said, I found the hotel receipts in April. My mother was in hospice in April. I said the name of the hotel. I said the dates. I said that some of the people in the room might want to update their understanding of who they were offering condolences to. I did not say the woman's name. I did not point at her. I did not need to. Every person in the room knew exactly who I was talking about, because every person in the room could see where my eyes had gone when I had finished speaking. She left within 4 minutes. I want to say something about the green bean casserole, and about what it had meant that he had brought it. My father had made the same green bean casserole for Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. He had gotten the recipe from my mother in the first year of their marriage, and had made it his own contribution to every Thanksgiving table for the 37 years after that. It was a simple dish, cream of mushroom soup, green beans, fried onions on top. He made it the same way every time. My mother had called it his signature dish with a specific gentle teasing affection that I had heard hundreds of times, and that I had not understood until she was gone was the sound of a marriage that had once been something good. When he had appeared at my door on Thanksgiving morning without her, and with the casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, I had felt something I had not expected to feel. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. He had come. He had brought the casserole. He had made the choice that the relationship with his children was more important than the position he had been trying to defend. He had not said this. He had said it by bringing the green bean casserole and leaving her at home. I had taken the dish from him at the door. I had said, "Come in, Dad." He had come in. My brother had been there. My sister had been there. The table had been set for the people who were there. The casserole had been the language he had spoken. I had received it in the language it had been sent. We are still in the long work of that conversation. It is the only conversation that matters now. I also want to say something about my mother's oldest friend who had been in the living room and who had looked at my father after the door had closed. Her name is Diane. She had known my mother for 41 years. She had been in the room when my mother and father had announced they were getting married. She had been in the room when my brother had been born, and when I had been born, and when my sister had been born. She had been at every significant event of my mother's adult life that had taken place in a room. She had been in this room too. When I had finished speaking and the room had gone quiet, and the door had eventually closed, Diane had walked across the living room and had come to stand beside me. She had not stood beside my aunt. She had come to stand beside me. She had said, "Your mother raised you right." I do not know if this is objectively true. I do not know if what I did in that living room was the right thing by any measure that anyone else would apply to it. What I know is that Diane, who had known my mother for 41 years and who had watched my mother move through the world with a specific precision and integrity for all of those years, had come to stand beside me and had said, "Your mother raised you right." I have held those 5 words for longer than I have held almost anything else from that day. The casserole dish. My aunt's hand. Diane's 5 words. These are what I carried out of that house. They're what I have still. Your mother raised you right. 5 words from a woman who had known her for 41 years. I hold them. The casserole dish. My aunt's hand. Diane's 5 words. These are what I carried out of that house. My mother is in all 3. The dish she had made him make. The hand of the sister who had kept her secret. The words of the friend who had watched her move through the world for 41 years and had recognized her in what I had done. She was in the room. She was in all of it. Diane calls me on my mother's birthday every year. She does not announce the call as being about my mother. She calls to talk. In the course of talking, she mentions something my mother did or said in one of their 41 years of friendship. The mention is specific and precise and always new to me. She is giving me my mother in increments. 1 memory per birthday call. I receive each one. I add them to what I already have. My mother is larger with each call. Diane knew her in 41 years of ways. She is still sharing them. Father stood at the fireplace for a long time before he found somewhere else to stand. My mother's sister came and stood beside me and took my hand and did not say a word. She had known. She had known since February. She had not told my mother either. Before I go on, if this story connects with something real in your life, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely feel it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. My name is Lauren. I am 34 years. I want to say something about Charlotte and about what it means to have grown up in a city and then to become a teacher in the same city, and about what that continuity had meant when my mother had been dying. Charlotte has a specific character as a southern city that has grown quickly into something larger than its original geography could have predicted. A banking center that has pulled people from many places, and that has the specific energy of a city still in the process of deciding what it is. My mother had grown up in the part of Charlotte that remembered what the city had been before it had become what it was. She had gone to school here and had met my father here, and had raised us here, and had worked for 26 years in the elementary school library that was 6 blocks from the house she had moved into when she had married my father, and had never left. I had grown up in that house and had gone to college in Virginia, and had come back. I had come back because my mother was here, and because the school where I teach was offering me a 3rd-grade classroom, and because Charlotte was where I was from in a way that the 4 years in Virginia had clarified rather than replaced. The house my mother had lived in for 37 years of marriage was 12 minutes from my apartment. I had been able to be there because of those 12 minutes. She had been able to ask me about the plants because of those 12 minutes. Charlotte had given me the 12 minutes. I had given them back to her. Every weekend. Every hospice evening. The 12 minutes had been everything. I also want to say something about what my mother had been like as a librarian specifically, and about the stories I remember most clearly from her 26 years at that school. She had talked about the children at dinner when we were growing up the way teachers and school workers talk about the children they serve, with the specific combination of exasperation and affection and respect that comes from taking children seriously as people. She had never talked about a child dismissively. Even the children who had been difficult had been talked about with an underlying assumption that the difficulty was a form of communication that she had not yet decoded. She had operated on the belief that every child who came into her library was looking for something even if they could not have told you what it was. Her job had been to figure out what they were looking for, and to put it in their hands at the moment when they were ready to receive it. She had talked about this with a specificity that I had absorbed as a child without knowing I was absorbing it, and that I had recognized fully only when I had begun teaching, and had found myself operating on the same belief about the children in my classroom. I had not consciously learned it from her. She had given it to me the way the best teachers give things, not as a lesson but as an atmosphere. The belief had been in the air I had breathed growing up. I had breathed it in. I had become a teacher. She had been a librarian. We had been in the same work. I had understood this fully only after she was gone. She had been a librarian until the last week. The yellow legal pad had been her last library. She had curated it for 6 grandchildren, and for the specific moments each of them would face. This is what a great librarian does. They think about the future reader and put the right thing in the right place for when that reader arrives. She had thought about her grandchildren's future selves in that hospice room. She had put herself there for when they arrived. She is still there. I am a 3rd-grade teacher because my mother was a school librarian. I did not decide this consciously. The decision had been made for me by 22 years of living in an atmosphere she had created. I breathed in the belief that the right thing given at the right moment to the right person changes something. I teach because I believe this. I believe it because she believed it. She had given it to me as an atmosphere. I inhaled it. I became a teacher. The same work. Different room. She is still in mine. Old. And this is the story of what I said at my mother's funeral, and what happened in the 6 months after it, and about why I do not regret a single word I said in that living room. Now let me explain the specific geography of grief that a daughter occupies when she learns her father is having an affair while her mother is dying. My mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months before she died. The diagnosis had come quickly, and the prognosis had been delivered without softening by a physician who respected her enough not to cushion it. My mother had handled it the way she handled everything, with organization. She had updated her will, she had arranged the house, she had written letters to her grandchildren to be given to them at various future milestones. She had done all of this in a period of 4 months before the disease had progressed enough to require hospice care. I had been going to my parents' house. I want to say something about the letters, and about what my mother had understood about legacy that the hotel receipts had not been able to touch. My mother had spent the last weeks of her life writing on a yellow legal pad with a pen I had brought from the house. She had been in a hospice room with a window that faced a courtyard with a dogwood tree in it. The dogwood had bloomed while she had been in that room. She had noticed the blooms and had mentioned them to me once in a way that had not been mournful, but had been simply observational. The tree had bloomed, she had noticed, she had told me about it. This is the quality of attention she had brought to the last weeks of her life, and it is the same quality of attention she had brought to the letters. The letters had been for her grandchildren. Each grandchild had been written to specifically. Not generic grandmother letters, but specific letters that named things she had observed about each child, things she had noticed about how they moved through the world, things she expected they would need to hear at specific future moments. The letters had been her last librarian's act. The right thing given at the right moment to the right child. She had known she would not be there for the moments. She had put herself there anyway. On yellow legal pad paper in sealed envelopes labeled in her handwriting. The hotel receipts had been in a center console. The letters had been for graduations and weddings. My mother had understood exactly what deserved her remaining time. She had given it to what deserved it. I also want to say something about what had happened when my brother's daughter had received the first of the letters at her 8th birthday. She is 7 when my mother died, and she had turned 8 several months after. My aunt had given the letter to my brother, who had given it to his daughter on her birthday morning before the party. She had not known what she was holding. My brother had told her, "This is a letter your grandmother wrote for you before she died. She wrote it for your 8th birthday specifically." His daughter had opened the envelope carefully and had unfolded the yellow legal pad paper and had read the letter. My brother had not been able to tell me what the letter said because he had not been able to finish the sentence about what the letter said. He had told me his daughter had read it twice and then had folded it back into the envelope and had held the envelope against her chest for a while before putting it on her nightstand. He had told me that at the party that afternoon his daughter had been different in a way that he could not have described to anyone who had not been watching her specifically. He had said, "She seemed held." That was the word he had used. Held. My mother had been dead for several months, and she had made her granddaughter feel held on her 8th birthday. From a hospice room with a dogwood outside the window. This is what the letters had been. This is what the yellow legal pad had been for. The hotel receipts were in a center console. The letters had been for this moment. The letters are still in their envelopes for the future milestones. The 8-year-old birthday letter had been the first to be opened. There are others waiting. High school graduations, college first days, wedding mornings. Each one on yellow legal pad paper in my mother's handwriting. She is there in every sealed envelope. She will be there at every milestone. The dogwood bloomed. She noticed. She told me. I still have the telling. My niece asked my brother whether Grandma had known she was going to write those specific things in the letter. My brother did not know how to answer. I think I know the answer. Yes. She had watched her grandchildren with a librarian's eye. She had identified what each one would need at each future moment. She had written it down. She had always known what to put in someone's hands. She had done it one final time for each of them. 6 children. A lifetime of noticing. Yellow legal pad. Sealed envelopes. Every weekend for those 4 months. And I had been going to the hospice facility 3 evenings a week in the final 2 months. My father had been present in those early months. He had been less present in the final months. I had attributed this to his difficulty with watching her decline. I had attributed it to his particular way of processing grief, which had always been private and self-contained. I had attributed it to the specific helplessness that men of his generation sometimes feel when the mechanism of caring is beyond their capacity to operate. I had not attributed it to the woman from his office because I had not known about the woman from his office until I had been returning his car after mine had been in the shop, and had opened the center console to find the charging cable, and had found the hotel receipts folded under it instead. The receipts had been for a hotel 30 miles from Charlotte. The dates had corresponded to 3 weekends when my father had told me he had been visiting his college friend in Asheville. I had held the receipts and I want to describe the specific moment when I found the hotel receipts, and about what I did in the 40 seconds after I found them. I had not been looking for anything. I had borrowed my father's car because mine had been in the shop, and he had left the keys on the kitchen counter without question because this was the kind of thing we did for each other, without ceremony. I had needed the charging cable for the drive to the hospice facility. I had opened the center console and the receipts had been there folded together, 3 of them, a hotel I recognized by name on the first one. I had looked at the dates. I had looked at the name on the receipts. The name had been my father's. The dates had been the same weekends he had told me he had been in Asheville. I had held them for a moment, and I had felt something that was not quite any single thing, but was several things at once. Not surprise, because when you find something like that, part of you recognizes that some part of you had already known. Not just anger, though the anger was there. Something more like clarity. The specific feeling of a thing that had been unclear becoming suddenly clear. I had put the receipts back exactly as I had found them. I had found the charging cable under them. I had plugged in my phone and I had driven to the hospice facility, and I had walked into my mother's room, and she had been sleeping, and I had sat in the chair beside her bed, and I had held her hand, and I had made the decision that I still believe was the right one. She would not know. Not from me. Not in that room. Not with that pen on that yellow legal pad, and those weeks still left. I also want to say something about the specific quality of the drive to the hospice facility that evening with the receipts already replaced in the center console. The drive was 22 minutes. I had done it many times by that point. I knew every turn. I drove the 22 minutes, and I did not call anyone. I did not call my brother or my sister or my aunt or my best friend, who had been my best friend since the 7th grade. I drove in silence, and I thought about my mother in that room with the dogwood tree outside the window, and the yellow legal pad on the rolling table, and the pen I had brought from the house. I thought about what she was writing. I thought about the envelopes she would seal and the names she would write on them. I thought, she is spending her time on this. I thought, the least I can do is protect the time she has left to spend on this. The 22 minutes had given me the decision. By the time I had parked the car, I had known what I was going to do and what I was not going to do. I was not going to tell her. I was going to go in and sit beside her and hold her hand and ask about the dogwood and listen to whatever she wanted to say. I had walked in and she had been sleeping. I had sat. I had held her hand. She had slept. I had been there. The 22 minutes had given me clarity. Being there had been the whole of what was required. I had been there. It had been enough. It was the right decision. I had replaced the receipts exactly as I had found them. I had driven to the hospice with the information folded into me the same way the receipts had been folded in the console. Held. Not gone. I had made the right decision in the 22 minutes. I hold it still. She got to spend those last weeks on the letters. I had protected that. The protection was the right thing. She had needed those weeks for the letters. She had gotten them. The 22 minutes had been enough to find the clarity. The clarity had been enough to make the decision. The decision had been enough to protect the remaining weeks. The weeks had produced the letters. The letters are still being opened. The chain had started in that parking lot. I had made the right choice in that parking lot. I am still certain of this. She had bloomed in that hospice room the same way the dogwood had bloomed outside her window. The last weeks had been some of the most fully present weeks I had known with her. I had been in the chair and she had been in the bed, and the dogwood had been outside, and the letters had been accumulating on the yellow legal pad. I had been there. That had been everything. The receipts in the console had not changed this. The decision in the parking lot had protected it. The parking lot of the hospice facility for 11 minutes before I had gone inside to sit with my mother. I had held her hand and she had been sleeping, and I had looked at her face and I had made a decision that I do not regret. I would not tell her. There was nothing to be gained by telling her. She had weeks, not months. She had used those weeks to write letters to her grandchildren. I was not going to redirect those weeks toward a conversation about my father and a hotel 30 miles from Charlotte. I want to say something before I go. I want to say something about my aunt and about what it had meant to have her stand beside me after I had spoken, and to say nothing. My mother's sister is 4 years older than my mother had been. They had been close in the way that sisters who are close in age and similar in temperament become close. Through shared history and through the specific intimacy of having watched each other grow up. She had been at the hospice facility many of the same evenings I had been there. We had sat in the family waiting room together and drunk the bad coffee and talked about my mother's childhood in a way that had been a specific form of presence, keeping her alive in memory in the room adjacent to where she was still alive in body. She had known since February. She had told me this 3 days after the funeral. She had known, and she had chosen not to tell my mother for the same reason I had chosen not to tell her. And she had chosen not to tell me because she had not known what I already knew and had not wanted to add weight I might not be carrying. We had both been protecting the same person from the same information in the same weeks without knowing the other was doing it. When she had stood beside me after I had spoken and had taken my hand without saying a word, she had been telling me something I already felt but needed to receive. That what I had said had been right to say, that the moment had been the right moment, that she had been beside me for all of it even when neither of us knew it. I also want to say something about what my aunt had told me my mother had said in February when she had first told her that she suspected something had changed. My aunt had not quoted her exactly. She had paraphrased in the way that people paraphrase when they are trying to protect the feeling of a conversation as well as the content of it. She had said, "Your mother told me she had decided to spend what she had left on the things that would last." She had said that my mother had been very clear about this. She had not been resigned or bitter. She had been deliberate. She had assessed what she had and had allocated it to what would produce the most lasting result. The letters had been the lasting result. 20-odd envelopes on a yellow legal pad that will be opened at graduations and weddings and first jobs by grandchildren who were 7 and 4 when she wrote them. She had looked at the 37 years and at the hotel receipts and at the weeks she had left, and she had made a choice about where to spend those weeks. I had cried when my aunt told me this. Not for what my mother had known, for the specific grace with which she had known it and had chosen what to do with the knowing. She had been a librarian. She had spent her professional life identifying what a person needed and giving it to them at the right moment. She had done this for herself in the last weeks of her life with the same precision she had done it for other people's children. She had needed the letters. She had written them. She had been a librarian until the end. She had known. She had chosen the letters. I had said what I had said. We had each done what we could do with what we knew. I do not think she would have told me not to say it. I think she would have nodded the way she nodded when she had considered something carefully and found it to be right. She was precise. She would have recognized the precision of the moment. I believe this. I hold it with the letters and the lily and the dogwood. My aunt and I talk more now than we had before my mother died. This is the specific gift that grief sometimes gives. It surfaces the relationships that had been maintained at a lower level of attention than they deserved. My aunt had loved my mother for 66 years. She knows my mother in ways I will never know her. She gives me those ways when we talk. I receive them. My mother is in those conversations too. She is still giving me things through the people she loved. She had chosen the letters. I had chosen the glass tap and the hotel name and the dates. We had each spent what we had on what mattered most to us. There is no universal right answer to what you do when someone you love is betrayed and then gone. There is only what you can live with. I can live with mine. She lived with hers. We had been, in our different ways, doing the same thing. Protecting what deserved to be protected with the tools available to us. She had the pen. I had the glass. Not about my father or about where things stand between us now, or about the woman, who I understand has since ended the relationship. About what my mother's sister had said to me 3 days after the funeral when we had been sitting in my kitchen going through the things my mother had left with her to give to me. She had said, "Your mother knew." She had said, not everything but enough. She had said that my mother had told her in February, 6 weeks before she died, that she suspected something had changed in my father, and that she had chosen not to pursue it because the pursuit would cost her something she could not afford to spend. She had said, "Your mother used the time she had the way she wanted to use it." She had said, "She wrote the letters." She knew. She chose the letters. I had cried in my kitchen for 40 minutes after my aunt left. Not for what my mother had known. For what she had chosen to do with what she had known. She had chosen the letters. She had chosen her grandchildren's future milestones over the hotel receipts. I had chosen to say something in the living room with the food the church ladies had brought. We had each made the choice we could live with. I can live with mine. My mother lived with hers with a grace I am still learning from. Thank you for staying until the end. I want to end with something about the piece lily, and about what happened to it after my mother died, and about why I still have it. After the funeral, I had gone to my parents' house, and had gathered the plants my mother had asked me to water. The pothos had been fine. The fern had been fine. The peace lily had been in the bedroom, and I had carried it to my car with the same care I had been giving it for the prior 2 months. Filtered water, not too much indirect light. I have it in my apartment now. It is on the windowsill in my living room where it gets the specific indirect morning light that suits it. It bloomed twice in the first year after my mother died. A peace lily that is cared for correctly will bloom. My mother had known this. She had given me the specific instructions not because she had assumed I did not know how to care for a plant, but because she had wanted me to know the specific requirements of this specific plant. The filtered water, the indirect light, the misting. These had been her instructions for the lily, and they had also been, I understand now, her instructions for everything. Know the specific requirements of the specific thing in front of you. Not the general theory of care. The specific requirements. Applied precisely. She had given me this as a librarian, and as a mother, and as a woman who had spent 37 years of marriage, knowing exactly what the thing in front of her required and providing it. She had known what the final weeks required. She had provided it. The letters are in sealed envelopes waiting for the right moments. The lily is on my windowsill. It bloomed again this spring. She is still giving me instructions. I am still following them. I also want to end with something about the dogwood tree outside my mother's hospice window, and about what I think of when I think about the last weeks of her life, and what they had contained. The dogwood had bloomed in April. My mother had noticed the blooms and had mentioned them to me once in a way that had been simply observational. She had not made the blooms into a metaphor. She had not connected them to her own situation in any of the ways that might have been easy or obvious to connect them. She had said, "The tree bloomed this week." She had said it the way she would have said it any other April. As information. As a noticed thing being shared with someone she wanted to share noticed things with. This is how she had spent her last weeks. Noticing things and writing letters and asking about the specific requirements of each plant, and sleeping when she needed to sleep, and being present in the room when she was able to be present. She had not spent the last weeks on the hotel receipts. She had not spent them on my father. She had spent them on the dogwood and the letters and the plants and the grandchildren's future milestones and on me, sitting in the chair beside her bed holding her hand while she slept. I had been there because of 12 minutes of driving across Charlotte. She had been there in the fullest possible sense of being there. The lily is on my windowsill. The letters are in their envelopes. The dogwood is blooming somewhere in a courtyard this April. My mother noticed the blooms. She told me about them. I still have the telling. I will always have the telling. The lily is on the windowsill. The letters are in their envelopes. The dogwood blooms every April somewhere in a courtyard in Charlotte. She noticed. She told me. I still have the telling. I will carry it until I am the one leaving the letters for the future milestones. She taught me how. I am learning the rest as I go. The lily blooms when it is cared for correctly. She knew this. She told me. She is still telling me. I am still listening. April comes every year. The dogwood blooms every year. My mother is not there to notice the blooms. I notice them for her. I notice them the way she taught me to notice things. As information, as a thing happening in the world, as something worth sharing with someone you want to share notice things with. I share them with the lily on the windowsill. I say, the dogwood bloomed this week. Just like that. As information. She can hear me. I believe this. I will keep telling her. If this story made you feel something, write it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear the story of what happened at Thanksgiving 4 months later, when my father tried to bring her to my house, and what I said at the door that ended that particular attempt, it is waiting for you in the description below. Click it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And if you have ever stood in a room full of people who deserve to know the truth, and you had to decide in real time whether to say it, I want you to know, the timing matters. My mother taught me that. Wait for the room to be full. Wait for the moment. Then say it clearly without cruelty, and let the room do the rest. I want to tell you more about my mother, and about who she had been in the 37 years of her marriage, and about what it means to know that she had known and had chosen the letters. My mother had been an elementary school librarian for 26 years. This is where I had gotten the teaching, or at least the direction of it, from watching her create reading environments for children who had not yet found the books that would change them. She had believed, with a conviction she had never examined because it had never needed examining, that the right book given at the right moment to the right child was one of the most important acts a person could perform. She had given me books my entire childhood with a specificity that I understand now, as a teacher myself, had been intentional and precise. Not the books that were popular or the books that were easy, but the books she had assessed, with a librarian's eye and a mother's knowledge of me, as the books I needed at the particular moment I needed them. She had been doing this for other people's children for 26 years. The letters she had written to her grandchildren were like this. My brother's daughter is 7. My sister's twins are 4. My mother had written letters to be given at their high school graduations, their 18th birthdays, the first day of their first jobs, their wedding days. She had written a letter for each grandchild for each milestone she had identified as the moments a person most needs to hear something specific from someone who loved them completely. She had spent the final weeks of her life doing this in a hospice room with a yellow legal pad and a pen she had asked me to bring from the house. I had brought the pen. I had not known what she was using it for until after she died, and my aunt had brought me the stack of sealed envelopes, each one labeled in my mother's handwriting with a name and an occasion. I want to say something about the Thanksgiving that came 4 months after the funeral, and about what had happened when my father had called the week before to say he was thinking of bringing a guest. He had not named I want to say something about my students, and about what teaching 3rd grade in the year after my mother died had been like, and about what the children had given me without knowing they were giving me anything. 3rd graders are 8 years old. They are in transition between the fully dependent self of early childhood and the beginning of the independent self that the later grades will develop. They are in the specific stage of learning to read to learn rather than learning to read, and this means they are in the stage of discovering that books contain worlds they did not know existed. I had understood this about them the way my mother had understood it about the children in her library. The book given at the right moment changes something. The year after my mother died, my students had given me the specific thing that 8-year-olds give when they are in the middle of discovering something: unself-conscious delight. A child who reads the first chapter book that fully absorbs them and closes it at the end of reading time with a specific expression of contained impatience to know what comes next is a child who has discovered something. I had seen this many times. In the year after my mother died, I had been more grateful for it than I had been able to express. My mother had spent 26 years creating the conditions for that expression. I had spent 9 years creating the conditions for it. We had been in the same work. I had not fully understood this until she was gone. I understand it now. Every time I see the expression, every time a child closes the book wanting more. That is my mother in my classroom. She is still there. I also want to say something about the children in my classroom in the September after my mother died, and about one specific child, and about what she did on the first day of school that year. Her name is Olivia. She is 8 years old. She had been placed in my class because her first grade teacher had written in the placement notes that she was a reader who needed the right teacher. On the first day of school, I had introduced the classroom library the way I always introduce it, by walking the students through the shelves and describing the sections and telling them that the library was theirs to use and that my job was to help them find what they were looking for. After I had finished the introduction, Olivia had raised her hand and had asked, "How do you know what book someone is looking for if they don't know what they're looking for yet?" I had stopped. The question had been exactly the right question. It was the question my mother had operated on for 26 years. I had said, "You watch them. You watch what they do when they read the books they already love. You watch where their attention goes. Then you find the next book that goes to the same place." Olivia had nodded as if this had confirmed something she had already suspected. I had thought of my mother in the specific sharp way you think of a person when you encounter the thing they taught you appearing in the world without warning. She had been in my classroom. She had been in Olivia's question. She is still there. Every September. Every first day. Every child who asks the right question without knowing it is the right question. Olivia is in 3rd grade this year, still asking the right questions. She is now deep in the first book that has fully absorbed her, and she closes it at the end of reading time with the specific expression of contained impatience that my mother had spent 26 years creating the conditions for. I see it and I think of my mother every time. She is in the classroom. She is in Olivia. She is in every child who asks the right question without knowing it is the right question. She is still teaching. My mother had spent 26 years creating the moment when a child closes a book with that expression. I have spent 9 years creating it. Olivia had it this year for the first time with a book I had put in her hands after watching her for 6 weeks. The right book, the right child, the right moment. My mother had taught me how without ever calling it a lesson. The atmosphere had been the teaching. I had breathed it in. Olivia had gotten the result. I want to say something about what my father had said in the days after the funeral, and about what I had said back, and about the specific conversation that had established where things were going to stand between us for the foreseeable future. He had called me the Friday after the funeral. He had said, "Lauren, what you did was not fair." He had said, "There were people at that funeral who did not need to know our family's business." I had said, "Dad, she was in our living room. She was standing beside you at Mom's funeral eating the food the church ladies brought." The people at that funeral had already been made to witness something they did not need to witness. I had not started that. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he had said, "Your mother and I had not been happy for years." I had said, "Then you should have had that conversation with her when she was not in a hospice bed." He had been quiet again. I had said, "I love you, Dad. I love you and you are my father and nothing is going to change that. But what you did while she was dying is the thing that it is, and both of us know it." He had said, "I know." Just those 2 words. I know. That had been the most honest thing he had said in the entire conversation. I had held on to those 2 words for the months after. I hold on to them still. He knows. He knows exactly what he did and what it was. The I know has been where I have chosen to place the weight of the thing rather than anywhere else. He knows. The rest is between him and what he knows. I also want to say something about where my relationship with my father is now, and about what I have decided about the ongoing work of that relationship. He is my father. He made a choice during the years of my mother's illness. That was what it was. Both of those things are true and neither cancels the other. I did not arrive at a clean resolution about this because there is no clean resolution available. What I arrived at was a decision about what I was going to do with the specific situation I had rather than the situation I would have preferred. I was going to maintain the relationship with my father because he is my father and because my mother would not have wanted the relationship ended. And I say this with confidence because I knew my mother. She had spent 37 years in a marriage, and she had been the person she was inside it, and that person was not a person who would have wanted her daughter to lose her father. I was going to maintain the relationship on my terms, which meant that the woman was not welcome in my house. I have maintained this. He has accepted it. The green bean casserole comes to my table at Thanksgiving. He sits at the table. My brother sits across from him. My sister sits beside me. The thing that is in the room is in the room, and we all know it is in the room, and we eat around it the way families eat around the things they cannot resolve, but have chosen not to let destroy what they still have. It is not a clean ending. It is a continuing story. I am still in it. He is still in it. We are both still in it. My mother would have said, "Good. Stay in the story." The green bean casserole comes to the table. He comes to the table. The story continues. My mother would have said, "Good. Stay in the story." I stay. He stays. The thing that is in the room is in the room, and we are in the room with it, and we eat the casserole, and we are a family that has been damaged and that has decided not to be destroyed. This is the choice. I have made it. He has made it. The table holds it. He is my father, and he did what he did, and both of those things are true, and I am in the long work of holding both true things at once. This is the work that has no clean completion. It is the work you keep doing. The Thanksgiving table. The green bean casserole. The thing in the room that everyone knows is in the room. We eat. We are family. We keep going. My mother would say, "Good. Keep going." I keep going. The guest. He had not needed to. I had said no. He had said that he hoped we could all begin to move toward healing. I had said, "You can come to Thanksgiving. Bring the green bean casserole the way you always do. The guest is not welcome in my house this year." He had said, "Lauren, your mother would have wanted." I had said, "Do not finish that sentence." I had said, "You do not get to use what my mother would have wanted to justify what you did while she was dying." I had said, "Bring the green bean casserole or don't come." He had come. Without her. He had brought the green bean casserole, and he had sat at the table, and my brother had sat across from him, and my sister had sat beside me, and nobody had said the thing that was in the room, but everyone had felt it, and by the end of the evening my father had cried at the table in a way I had not seen him cry since the funeral, and my brother had put his hand on his shoulder and said something I could not hear. I want to say something about my third-grade classroom, and about why the teaching had given me the specific tools I had used in that living room. Third grade is the year children move from learning to read to reading to learn. It is a transition year, and transition years are managed by timing and by clarity. You identify the moment when the child is ready for the next level of challenge, and you deliver the challenge at that moment, not before and not after. Too early and the child cannot receive it. Too late, and the child has already moved past the moment of maximum readiness. I had learned across 9 years of this work to read rooms the way I read children, to understand when the moment of maximum readiness had arrived. The living room on the day of my mother's funeral had arrived at maximum readiness when the room was full, when the plates were loaded, when the condolences had been offered, when she was standing beside him with her hand on his arm in full view of every person who had loved my mother. The moment had been exactly right. I had delivered the information at the moment it would land most completely. This is what teaching 8-year-olds for 9 years had given me. The timing, the room, the delivery, without cruelty, without pointing. The information itself said clearly had been enough. I want to say something about my mother's houseplants and about why I had remembered them as the specific detail that had organized everything else. In the weeks before she went to hospice, my mother had asked me to water her houseplants. She had given me specific instructions for each plant. The pothose by the kitchen window needed water every 10 days. The peace lily in the bedroom was sensitive to minerals and needed filtered water. The fern in the bathroom wanted to be misted rather than watered directly. She had given me these instructions with the same precision. She had given me everything. She had cared about those plants. She had cared about the specific requirements of each one. The woman who had been sleeping with my father while my mother was making sure someone knew about the filtered water for the peace lily had been standing in my mother's living room eating my mother's church friend's food. I had thought about the peace lily when I tapped the glass. I had thought. She knew about the filtered water. She was precise about what required care. She deserved someone who understood what required care. I said what I said in that living room for the peace lily as much as for anything else.